The galaxy had seen many things across its endless history. Stars were born and died. Worlds turned, evolved, and fell silent again. Civilizations rose with pride, believing they were destined to last forever only to collapse under their own arrogance. Yet, even with all that knowledge and history, no one in the great station orbiting the twin suns was ready for what they were about to witness. That day began like any other. The council station was alive with its usual rhythm. Hundreds of species gathered in its long, echoing halls, each with their own colors, languages, and traditions. Merchants argued with diplomats. Soldiers stood tall in ceremonial armor, and ambassadors whispered into translators that tried their best to keep up with 1,000 voices. It was noisy, chaotic, and very alive until the alarms rang. At first, no one paid attention. Alerts were common in a place that sat at the intersection of so many empires. Ships came and went. Traders pushed boundaries. Pirates occasionally tried their luck. Most thought it was simply another misunderstanding. But as the sirens deepened and the great viewing panels lit up with warning symbols, a strange hush fell over the chambers. Far out in the darkness of space, beyond the range where most vessels dared to travel, something enormous was cutting through the void. The scanners picked it up before the naked eye could see. It was not a familiar design. It was not marked with any known empire's crest. The readings showed a vessel bigger than most dreadnoughts, with a density that defied comparison. For the first time in decades, the station's leaders were caught off guard. They demanded reports from their officers, details from their scanners, anything that could explain what was coming. The officers, however, could only stare at the data in disbelief. This was no merchant convoy. This was no wandering freighter. It was something entirely new. Word spread quickly. Rumors always moved faster than truth. Some said it was a weapon from the ancient builders, a forgotten race that had disappeared before most of the current civilizations had even learned to walk. Others whispered it was a doomsday device, set adrift in the stars, now finally finding its way to the heart of the council. But one word began to surface again and again, spoken in disbelief and hushed tones: humans. Until that day, most of the galaxy had only heard fragments of stories about Earth. A rough world, they said. A dangerous place where storms, earthquakes, and shifting climates kept life constantly struggling to survive. They called it a death world, a term reserved for planets so hostile that most species would not last a day on their surface. Yet somehow, against all odds, that fragile race had grown there. They had built shelters, tools, machines, and then, impossibly, they had built ships. But no one believed humans could have reached this far this soon. They were too young, too inexperienced. The empires of the galaxy had dismissed them as background noise, a curious little species that would burn itself out before ever becoming important. And yet the object approaching the station told a different story. Through the vast windows of the council chamber, the silhouette finally appeared. At first it was just a dark speck against the endless stars. But it grew, and it grew fast. Soon the shape of the vessel filled the void, its lines sharp, its hull scarred from travels that no one could trace. It was not elegant like the ships of the council races. It was not decorated with glowing emblems or graceful wings. This was a fortress built not to impress but to endure. Every eye turned to it. Every conversation died away. Even the translators, which normally hummed without pause, went silent as if the machines themselves hesitated. The battleship moved steadily, unhurried, with the quiet confidence of something that did not need to announce its power. Inside the station, tension climbed. Security systems powered up. Automated defenses prepared to lock on. Generals demanded orders to ready their fleets, but no one wanted to give the command. No one wanted to be the first to challenge the unknown, and still the human ship came closer. In the Grand Council chamber, leaders from dozens of worlds sat frozen. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting toward the display screens. Others pressed their hands against the table, trying to appear calm but betraying their unease. A few whispered about retreat, about abandoning the station before it was too late. But deep down they all knew the same truth. Whatever humanity had brought with them, it was already too late to run. The silence grew heavier. You could almost feel it pressing against the walls, filling the lungs of every living being on the station. For a place that had never known quiet, where every moment was filled with voices, trade, and debate, the sudden stillness was unnerving. Then, for the first time, the ship released a signal. It was not a demand. It was not a declaration of war. It was simply a presence, a single message cast into the airwaves that spoke without needing words. Humanity is here. The impact was immediate. Many who heard it shivered without knowing why. It was not threatening, yet it carried a weight that could not be ignored. It was the sound of a people who had walked through storms and fire and refused to be broken. For the Council, this was a moment unlike any other. They had faced wars, invasions, and uprisings before, but those threats were familiar. This was something new. A young race, one they had disregarded, had crossed the stars and arrived not with begging hands but with a battleship that silenced the galaxy. No one knew what would happen next. Would the humans demand a seat at the table? Would they strike first, claiming revenge for centuries of neglect? Or would they do something none of the empires expected, stand as equals, not as conquerors? In the shadows of the chamber, an old ambassador leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper. They came from a world that tried to kill them every day. If they could survive that, then perhaps the rest of us should be the ones afraid. No one argued with him. Not this time. Not when the truth stood outside their windows, larger than any warship they had ever known. And so the station remained still, caught between fear and awe as the battleship of Earth drew closer. It was a moment that would be remembered for centuries. A moment when the galaxy learned that silence could be louder than any weapon, and that the arrival of humanity was not just another event in the stars, but the beginning of a new chapter. Across the station, the tension from the strange ship's arrival refused to fade. Even as the alarm stopped ringing and the immediate danger seemed less certain, the unease lingered in every corner. The vessel still floated outside, silent and immovable as if watching. The Council tried to go on with its discussions, but nothing could cover the questions hanging in the air. Everyone knew the same word was spreading like fire across the halls, whispered in disbelief. Humans. For most of the galaxy, Earth was little more than a rumor. Many species had never met a human in person. At best, they had seen recordings, short glimpses of a species that walked on two legs with fragile-looking bodies compared to the armored hides, scaled skin, or exoskeletons of other civilizations. They looked breakable, almost soft, and yet, stories about them never matched their appearance. Travelers spoke of a world unlike any other, a planet constantly changing, never letting its people rest. The air carried storms that could flatten forests. The seas rose in waves that swallowed whole villages. The ground shook and split apart with quakes while fire burst from mountains without warning. To most species, such a place would have been impossible to call home. They would have abandoned it long before they could build a civilization. But Earth's people had no choice. They stayed and they adapted. Some called them reckless. Others called them stubborn. But slowly a different word began to surface. Resilient. In the markets of distant stations, merchants whispered tales of human explorers who survived where no one else dared to travel. Hunters described how humans could chase prey for days without rest, using patience instead of speed. Soldiers claimed humans kept fighting even when wounded, refusing to surrender until every last option was gone. At first, these were dismissed as exaggerations, the kind of stories people told to pass the time. But now, with that battleship standing outside the Council's windows, no one could laugh at those stories anymore. Inside the station's gathering halls, the ambassadors could hear the fear in the conversations around them. Words like unpredictable and deathworlders kept coming up. The idea of a death world was not new. It was a label used by scientists to classify planets so hostile that life there was more likely to die than survive. Most of those planets remained empty. The few that had developed life produced only small, aggressive creatures, never intelligent civilizations. Yet humans had broken that rule. They had not only lived, they had thrived. Some of the Council members shifted in their seats, remembering how they had once laughed at Earth's representatives during early meetings. Humans had been eager then, arriving with simple ships and big ideas. The great powers had smiled politely, offered them minor trade deals, and quietly ignored them afterward. They saw humans as noisy children, desperate to prove themselves in a room full of adults. No one thought they would make it far, and yet here they were now, arriving in silence with a warship that none of the old empires could match. That realization unsettled many. If humans could achieve this much without the Council's help, what else might they do in the years to come? How much stronger could they grow, building in secret while everyone dismissed them? And why had they come now? The questions piled higher and higher. Some species worried aloud that the humans might be preparing for conquest. Others argued they were only here to demand respect, perhaps a seat on the council. A few, the most optimistic, hoped they had come seeking peace. But no matter the guess, everyone agreed on one thing: they could not be ignored anymore. In the corridors, messengers carried reports of Earth's history to those who had forgotten. They reminded the council that humans had endured countless hardships even before they reached the stars. Their own world had nearly destroyed them many times over. Famines, plagues, and endless conflicts had threatened to wipe them out. Yet somehow they always returned stronger than before. Unlike other civilizations, humans did not seem to be shaped by comfort or abundance. They were shaped by struggle. And from that struggle came invention, creativity, and a drive that many other species could not understand. One ambassador, speaking quietly to his peers, compared humans to fire. They burn, he said, because their world forces them to. If the wind rises, they bend and flicker, but they do not go out. If you try to smother them, they find a way to breathe again. Fire can warm, but fire can also destroy. Which side of them we see depends on how we treat them. His words spread quickly, repeated in many different tongues, and more than a few heads nodded in agreement. Outside, the battleship waited without moving closer. The longer it remained still, the more its silence pressed on the council's nerves. It was almost worse than if it had fired a weapon. A threat could be answered. An attack could be defended. But this quiet, patient presence was harder to face. It forced every leader to look inward and question their own assumptions. Some of the younger delegates had trouble hiding their curiosity. They leaned toward the viewing screens, marveling at the ship's design. Unlike their own fleets, which often balanced form and beauty, the human vessel was brutal in its appearance. Its angles were sharp, its armor thick, and its weapons mounted without subtlety. It carried the look of a machine built by a people who had no luxury of wasting time on elegance. Everything about it was practical, direct, and unyielding. It was as if the ship itself carried Earth's story in its bones. The silence of the galactic visitors, their shock, their hesitation, was not just because of fear. It was also recognition. They could see themselves reflected in the humans, but in a harsher mirror. Where other species had learned to thrive in balance with gentle worlds, humans had been shaped by conflict. Where others had been given peace, humans had been forced to fight for every moment of survival. And now that spirit had crossed the stars. The council chamber, normally alive with arguments and speeches, felt different that day. Words came slower. Ambassadors looked at one another with uncertainty. They were leaders of old empires, used to speaking from positions of strength, but now they felt like students waiting for a teacher to arrive. Humanity had not yet said a single word to them, and already they had changed the atmosphere of the galaxy. The whispers continued late into the night cycle. Guards spoke to one another in hushed tones, wondering if they would soon see war. Traders worried about their routes, fearing that if humans entered the markets, they would bring competition unlike any they had faced. Scholars speculated about what kind of culture could rise from such a violent world, and whether humans would share knowledge or guard it closely. For every voice that feared them, there was another that admired them. Some saw hope in the humans' arrival. They thought perhaps this new species could break the council's endless stalemates, challenge the older powers, and bring fresh ideas into a galaxy that had grown stagnant. To them, humanity's unpredictability was not a curse but a gift. By the end of the cycle, one truth became clear. No matter what anyone thought, no matter what hopes or fears they carried, humanity was no longer a rumor. They were real. They were here, and their presence had silenced the mightiest voices in the galaxy. The whispers of Earth spread from one corner of the station to another, and beyond to ships and colonies far away. In markets, in military bases, in schools and homes, the same story was told. Humanity had come. And whether the galaxy was ready or not, nothing would ever be the same again. The object that had once looked like a shadow against the stars now filled the entire view of the council station. No one could ignore it anymore. It was not just another ship drifting through space. It was something alive with purpose, built by hands that had known struggle. Every detail spoke louder than words, and the closer it came, the clearer the truth became. This was humanity's creation, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Through the giant windows of the station, thousands gathered to watch. Diplomats stood side by side with soldiers. Traders leaned against the railings, and even workers from the lower levels came rushing to the viewports. No one wanted to miss it. The battleship was enormous, its size dwarfing even the Council's defense fleets. Its armor was thick and layered, showing the scars of journeys that none of the onlookers could imagine. It did not shine with polished beauty the way other empires' ships often did. It looked raw, as though it had been hammered into existence by a people with no time for luxury. The first thing most noticed was how different it was from their own designs. Other ships in the galaxy carried elegance in their forms, some curved like flowing water, with glowing sails that caught energy from the stars. Others spread their wings like great birds of prey, balancing function with style. The human vessel had none of that. It was brutal, angular, heavy, and unmistakably built for survival. It was not made to be admired. It was made to endure. The second thing they noticed were the weapons. Arrayed across its surface were systems unlike anything the Council had seen before. Turrets that seemed able to rotate in every direction. Launch bays that hinted at hidden tools of war. Strange rail-like structures that stretched the length of the hull. Their purpose a mystery, but their potential terrifying. No other species had mounted so many armaments on a single ship. To some it looked excessive, almost desperate, as if the humans had planned for every possible threat. To others it was genius, a floating fortress that no fleet could challenge alone. The tension inside the station climbed higher with every passing minute. Commanders argued over activating the defense grid. Some begged the Council to order the fleets into formation, yet still no order was given. The fear of provoking the humans outweighed the fear of waiting. Every leader understood that one wrong move could light a fire no one was ready to control. The ship slowed as it reached the edges of the station's protected zone. It did not rush forward, nor did it angle its weapons. It simply drifted into position, steady and deliberate like a giant standing silently among smaller creatures. That patience unsettled the crowd even more. A ship that powerful did not need to wait, yet it did, and that made its presence even heavier. Then something changed. A pulse of energy rippled from the battleship, a controlled signal rather than an attack. Lights flickered as the message reached the Council's systems. On the display screen, symbols began to form, translating slowly into words the galaxy could understand. There was no threat, no ultimatum. The message was short and clear. Humanity had arrived. It was enough to silence even the boldest voices in the chamber. Some stared at the message in disbelief, as though they could not believe such a simple statement carried so much power. Others felt the weight of it in their bones. This was not the voice of a desperate people begging for recognition. This was the voice of survivors declaring themselves as equals. A murmur spread through the hall. Many could not stop staring at the vessel itself. They wondered what kind of world could force its people to build such a thing. They thought of Earth, the death world of storms and fire, and suddenly the ship made sense. Of course, it looked the way it did. It carried the spirit of the planet that made it. Every sharp edge, every layer of armor, every weapon spoke of a people who had never been given an easy path. On the outer decks of the station, soldiers stood at attention, their hands hovering over controls they prayed they would not need to use. They had fought wars before, but this felt different. This was not just another fleet arriving to intimidate. This was something entirely new. The humans had built a ship that did not try to blend into the galaxy's expectations. It stood apart, declaring its difference with every line of its design. Inside the chamber, the counselors sat frozen. They were the rulers of ancient civilizations, many of them centuries old, used to being respected and feared. Yet now, as they watched the ship on the screens, they felt as if the ground beneath them had shifted. They were no longer certain of their place. For the first time in generations, they were looking at a species that had the power to challenge their balance. Some tried to speak, to argue that perhaps the ship was not as strong as it looked. They said maybe it was all a show, a bluff to gain attention, but deep down no one truly believed that. The scars on the hull told another story. Those marks were not decorations, they were the record of battles fought in silence, far from the Council's eyes. Humans had already been tested, and this ship was the proof that they had survived. The crowd inside the station grew restless. Whispers spread through the ranks of those who had gathered to watch. Some said the humans must be preparing for war. Others argued they were here to warn the galaxy of something greater. A few believed they had come simply to prove they existed, to show the universe that Earth could not be ignored anymore. Whatever the reason, the effect was the same. No one in the galaxy could look at that ship and see humanity as small again. Even the children of the station, pressed against the glass of the viewing decks, fell quiet. They might not have understood politics or war, but they felt the weight of the moment. They would remember this sight for the rest of their lives, the day a human battleship appeared and silenced the stars. The station's defenses remained armed but unused. The counselors sat in silence, torn between fear and awe, and outside, the human vessel waited unmoving, as though giving the galaxy a chance to decide how to respond. It was not threatening, not yet. But it was undeniable. Humanity had revealed itself, and nothing could erase that truth. The old ways of thinking, the belief that Earth was too young, too weak, too reckless, were already crumbling. The Council could feel it. The visitors who had once laughed at humans now kept their eyes fixed on the battleship, too afraid to look away. In that moment, the galaxy learned a lesson it would never forget. Silence could be as powerful as fire, and presence alone could be stronger than any weapon. And as the battleship lingered there, its shadow stretching across the station's windows, one thought echoed through every mind, from the highest counselor to the lowest worker. Humanity had stepped onto the stage of the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. Inside the grand chamber of the station, the council sat in uneasy silence. The room, usually alive with arguments, speeches, and the constant hum of translators, felt strangely hollow. Every ambassador, every leader, every guard knew their eyes should be on each other, but instead, they kept looking back at the great screen showing the human battleship waiting outside. The silence was heavy. No one wanted to be the first to break it. In all the history of the council, there had been shouting matches that shook the walls, fierce debates that lasted for days, even fights that nearly turned the chamber into a battlefield. But never silence like this. Silence meant uncertainty. Silence meant fear. One ambassador finally shifted in his chair, the sound echoing louder than it should have. His voice was low and nervous when he spoke. "We must decide," he said, though even he did not sound convinced. "Do we treat them as an ally, or as a threat?" The question hung in the air. None of the old rules seemed to fit anymore. Normally, when a new species arrived at the council, there was a process. Tests, negotiations, long debates about their rights and responsibilities. But this was no ordinary arrival. Humanity had not come knocking politely on the council's doors. They had come in silence with a ship so powerful that it challenged everything the council thought it knew about the balance of power. Some of the older leaders tried to steady their voices. They reminded the others that humans were still young, still inexperienced compared to the ancient civilizations that had ruled the stars for centuries. They argued that humans could be guided, perhaps even controlled if approached carefully, but those words sounded hollow even to themselves. The truth was staring at them through the window. No one could control a people who built a ship like that. A few of the more cautious members suggested retreat. "If they wish to speak," one said, "let them speak on their own world. Let us not bring them here into the heart of our politics." But others quickly rejected that idea. Leaving would make the council look weak, and weakness could invite chaos from every corner of the galaxy. The arguments began to build, rising and falling like waves. Some spoke of fear, others spoke of opportunity. One voice, sharp and anxious, demanded immediate military action before humanity grew even stronger. Another voice countered, saying that such an attack would not only fail but would unite humanity against them forever. Each opinion felt urgent, yet none carried enough strength to convince the others. Then at last a sound cut through the noise. The humans were transmitting again. The chamber fell silent instantly. Every head turned toward the glowing screen as the translation system worked to decode the message. This time it was not just a signal of presence. It was words, simple, clear, and direct. The humans were asking to talk, not to surrender, not to threaten, simply to talk. The ambassadors looked at one another in disbelief. For a moment, the tension seemed almost absurd. They had prepared for war, for demands, for impossible ultimatums. And yet, the humans had asked for nothing more than dialogue. But the silence that followed was not relief. It was confusion. The council members struggled to understand what kind of people would arrive with such force only to speak so calmly. They had expected arrogance or desperation. Instead, they found something harder to measure: quiet strength. An elder counselor finally leaned forward. His voice was soft, but it carried across the chamber. "Perhaps this is the lesson," he said. "We expected them to be like us, loud, proud, eager to show dominance. But they are not like us. They are shaped by their world. They speak plainly because their survival has never depended on fancy words. Their world taught them action. Their silence is not weakness. It is discipline." Many nodded slowly. The words struck deep, and for a moment even those who had spoken for war hesitated. The debate shifted again. Some argued that humanity's calm request for dialogue was even more dangerous than a threat. "Do you not see?" one ambassador cried. "They don't need to threaten us. Their silence is enough. Their presence is enough. If we give them a seat at the table, we may be inviting the very force that will end us." Others disagreed. "Or perhaps," another countered, "if we shut them out, we create the very enemy we fear. If we turn our backs on them, they will find their own path, and perhaps others will follow them." The words stung. Everyone in that chamber knew it was true. Many smaller species had long complained that the council was slow, heavy, and unwilling to change. Humanity's sudden arrival offered something different, something raw and unpolished, but also honest. And there were some in the galaxy who would welcome such a force. The arguments dragged on, but the weight of the battleship outside never left their minds. Each time a voice grew too loud, it faltered as eyes drifted back to the screens. Each time someone spoke of defiance, they imagined what would happen if that vessel decided to turn its weapons toward the station. It was not just fear of destruction that silenced them. It was recognition. Recognition that a new power had arrived, one that did not play by the Council's rules. Humanity did not come begging. Humanity did not come boasting. They came standing tall, asking simply to be heard. In the end, the Council gave no clear answer. They sat in silence, trapped between pride and caution. Some were ready to welcome humanity. Others wanted to push them away. But none could deny the truth anymore. The galaxy had changed the moment the humans arrived. As the session ended, ambassadors walked out slowly, their minds heavy. Whispers followed them into the corridors. Some spoke of opportunity, others of fear, but all carried the same image in their thoughts. The battleship waiting outside, scarred but unbroken. A symbol of a people who had endured their world and now stood ready to endure the stars. The silence of the council that day was not just hesitation. It was the sound of empires realizing they were no longer the only ones who shaped the galaxy. It was the moment they understood that a new voice had joined the chorus, a voice forged in hardship, a voice that could no longer be ignored. And beyond the station's walls, the ship of Earth remained, patient and unmoving, as though it understood the weight of the silence it had created. For the humans, there was no rush. They had waited centuries on their world to claim their place in the stars. They could wait a little longer. The silence in the grand chamber lasted longer than anyone expected. After the message from the human ship, the alien council members found themselves staring at one another, unsure what to say, unsure how to move forward. It was rare for them to be without words. They were leaders, politicians, warriors, thinkers, beings who usually thrived in endless arguments and long speeches. But this time they had no immediate response. The quiet was almost heavy, as though the very walls of the station were listening. Out beyond the station's windows, the human battleship remained still. It didn't move to attack, didn't demand anything, didn't even show aggression. It simply hovered there, silent, massive, and unshaken. For all its power, it seemed almost calm, like a mountain in the middle of a storm, unmoved by the chaos around it. The aliens tried to read the humans' intentions. Some imagined that silence meant hidden threats, others thought it meant patience. But for those who studied Earth before, they understood something deeper. Silence was often a kind of strength. Humans didn't need to shout to prove themselves. Their presence spoke louder than any threat. One of the older ambassadors, his skin like cracked stone and his voice usually sharp, leaned forward finally. "They are not what we imagined," he said quietly. "We expected arrogance. We expected demands. But what we see is something else." His words rippled through the chamber. Others nodded, though carefully. None of them wanted to admit out loud that they felt a kind of respect. For centuries, the Galactic Council had seen themselves as the keepers of order. They believed no young species could rise to their level without being shaped, controlled, or guided. Humanity had been ignored, sometimes even dismissed as reckless or too emotional. But now everything had changed. The humans had arrived with a ship built not for decoration but for survival, and they had spoken with directness that carried weight. It was no longer possible to treat them as children of the stars. They had stepped forward as equals. The message from the human commander was replayed on the chamber's wide display. His words had been simple. "We come not to dominate but to stand among you. We know struggle and we know survival. We ask not for fear but for recognition." Those words echoed in every mind. Recognition, that was all they had asked for. Not power, not land, not tribute. And that was what unsettled the council most of all. Because in the galaxy, requests always came with hidden motives. But with humans, it was different. They asked only to be seen. Outside the station, other ships had gathered, smaller fleets from distant worlds, curious observers, even opportunists hoping to gain from whatever came next. When they saw the human battleship, many of them fell silent too. It wasn't the weapons that silenced them, though those were terrifying enough. It was the feeling that the humans had built something from nothing, with fewer resources than most great empires, yet with a determination none could deny. Inside the ship itself, the human crew waited. They weren't warriors thirsting for blood. They were people carrying the weight of their entire species on their shoulders. Each one of them knew that their actions here would decide how the galaxy viewed Earth for centuries. Some were nervous, some were proud, but all stood together with the same thought. They weren't here to bow and they weren't here to conquer. They were here to show that Earth had earned its place. Finally, the council chairperson spoke. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to mask it with authority. "We acknowledge your arrival. Humanity has built something remarkable, and it is clear you are no longer a distant world. You stand before us as one of the voices in this galaxy. The council will recognize your presence." The human commander gave a simple nod in reply. There was no celebration, no outburst of joy, only calm acceptance. Recognition was not a gift. It was something humanity had already earned through centuries of struggle. This moment was simply the galaxy admitting it. Yet beneath the surface, everyone knew things would not be so simple. Recognition was one thing, respect another. Trust was even harder to achieve. Some alien empires would feel threatened, some would prepare for rivalry, and others would look for alliances. Humanity's arrival had set the galaxy into motion. Like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples would spread far and wide. For the people of Earth, news of the battleship's arrival and the council's silence spread quickly. On the home planet, billions watched as images and transmissions reached them. Pride swelled, but so did responsibility. Ordinary people saw the great ship and felt both awe and fear, because now Earth was no longer invisible. The galaxy knew their name. In quiet homes, families whispered about the future. Would humanity be dragged into wars not their own? Would they be respected or targeted? These were real questions, and no one had answers yet. But deep down, most people felt a sense of unity they hadn't known before. For the first time, they weren't just citizens of nations. They were citizens of Earth. Back in the council chamber, after the humans had ended their first broadcast, the silence returned once more. It was not the silence of fear this time, but of deep thought. Each leader was asking themselves what this meant for the future. The galaxy had grown comfortable with its balance of power. But now a new player had entered the game, one shaped not by luxury but by hardship. As the session ended, many realized they had witnessed history. This was the day humanity stepped into the wider stage of the universe, and they had done so not with arrogance but with quiet strength. The battleship remained in orbit, not as a weapon pressed against the council's throat, but as a reminder, humanity had arrived, and they were not going back. Over the next days and weeks, discussions would continue. Treaties would be drafted, alliances considered, and rivalries born. Some alien empires would attempt to test humanity's limits. Others would look for friendship. But no matter what happened next, one truth could not be erased. The galaxy would never again underestimate the people of Earth. The battleship would become a legend. Stories about its arrival would spread across worlds, told in markets, schools, and even war councils. Some would describe it as a beast of steel, others as a symbol of hope. But to humanity, it was something simpler. Proof that even a small, struggling world could rise high enough to be heard, and so, the silence of that moment, The silence that fell when the battleship appeared would live on forever. It was not a silence of emptiness, but a silence filled with respect, filled with recognition. The galaxy had listened, and in its own way, the galaxy had answered. From that point onward, whenever humanity sent a ship into the stars, it carried with it not only weapons or technology, but the memory of that silence, a memory that reminded them of who they were, survivors, builders, dreamers, and now, members of a galaxy that finally knew their name. And somewhere, far away in the darkness of space, the battleship continued its steady orbit, a guardian and a messenger, watching over the dawn of a new chapter for Earth. Humanity had come forward with resilience, and the stars had listened.